You know from the intelligence, how close are we to another war with Iran?
Well, I don't want to say that.
Trump won't say whether a war with Iran is imminent, but what he does say is this.
We have a big force going toward Iran.
And this.
I hope they make a deal. I hope they make a deal.
Now, unlike Davos, where he pledged not to use military force against Greenland, Trump maintains strategic ambiguity on Iran. But just in case Khamenei thinks that Trump doesn't mean business, he rams home the point that the U.S. Armada, headed by the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln, is larger than the one he dispatched to the Caribbean for capturing Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro. He also says that the U.S. military is prepared to rapidly fulfill its mission with speed and violence if necessary, and that the consequences of Iran's refusal to come to the negotiating table would be severe. Also, he invokes the 2025 U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities to warn Tehran that the next attack will be far worse. So is Trump planning to do a Venezuela on Iran? The signaling is there for all to see. Trump's Iran strategy bears an uncanny resemblance to the U.S. intervention in Venezuela, codenamed Operation Absolute Resolve. It includes naval pressure, threat of force, and ultimatums. At 86, Khamenei has retreated from daily governance and reduced his public appearances. He is believed to be living in secure locations. Day-to-day management has shifted to figures aligned with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, such as his senior advisor, Ali Larijani. The IRGC dominates Iran's security network and large parts of the economy. Khamenei retains the final authority over war, succession, and nuclear strategy. What that means is that political change in Iran is difficult until he exits the scene. So, what are Trump's options? Can the US capture Khamenei? Experts caution that a snatch and grab operation is not likely because Iran's capabilities far exceed those of Venezuela. So, capturing Khamenei is not on the cards. Eliminating Khamenei will not cut it either. Although US lawmaker Lindsey Graham, who has Trump's ear, has made a direct appeal to the US president to kill Khamenei, it is believed that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps could step in to fill the vacuum, which will only serve to further entrench hardline rule, deepen the nuclear standoff, and escalate regional tensions. That's because the IRGC's express mandate is to preserve and protect the Islamic Republic's ideology. Therefore, any successor to Khamenei who is seen as emerging from under foreign pressure would be rejected, and it could strengthen, not weaken, the IRGC. What about airstrikes then? Reuters news agency quotes an Israeli official with direct knowledge of planning between Washington, D.C. and Tel Aviv as saying that airstrikes alone cannot topple the Islamic Republic. The Israeli official is reported as saying that if you are going to topple the regime, you have to put boots on the ground, which again is not under consideration. The Israeli official goes on to say that although Iran's leadership has been weakened by the recent protests, it remains firmly in control. And therefore, only a combination of external pressure and an organized domestic opposition could shift Iran's political trajectory. Another option being discussed by Trump aides includes a much larger strike intended to have lasting impact, possibly against Iran's ballistic missile silos or nuclear enrichment facilities. Mohanad Haji Ali of the Carnegie Middle East Center in Beirut, Lebanon says U.S. military deployments to the region suggest that the Trump government's planning has shifted from a single strike to something more sustained, driven by a belief that Tehran could rebuild its missile capabilities and eventually weaponize its enriched uranium.
We will be prepared to deliver whatever this president expects of the War Department.
But Iran has already warned of quick retaliation. Ali Shamkhani, an advisor to Khamenei, says a military action by the US will elicit an immediate and unprecedented response from Iran. Foreign Minister Syed Abbas Araghchi in turn says Iran's armed forces have their finger on the trigger. At the same time, he says Iran will welcome a mutually beneficial, fair and equitable nuclear deal provided it is negotiated on an equal footing and free from coercion, threats or intimidation. Similarly, Tehran's mission to the UN says it is prepared for discussions with the US, but it will defend itself if provoked. It cautions the Trump government that the last time the US blundered into wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, it squandered more than $7 trillion and lost more than 7,000 of its soldiers. In the last few days, Iran has unveiled a mural in Tehran's Inqilab Square. The mural shows damaged planes scattered across the deck of an aircraft carrier, meant as a warning to the US not to launch a military strike on Iran. An accompanying slogan in Farsi and English reads, "If you sow the wind, you will reap the whirlwind."
The movement of a warship will not affect Iran's will or determination. We possess both the resolve and the full capability to defend Iran.
So all things considered, Trump could seek to engineer a change in leadership rather than topple the regime, an outcome that would be similar to Venezuela, where US intervention replaced a president without a wholesale change of government. In other words, he wants to create conditions for a regime change. And to do so, he is looking at options to hit commanders and institutions whom the US holds responsible for the recent crackdown in order to give protesters the confidence that they could overrun government and security buildings. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio revealed the Trump government's mind when he told a committee of US lawmakers that street protests will spark up again in Iran.
That regime is probably weaker than it has ever been. And the core problem they face, unlike the protests you saw in the past on some other topics, is that they don't have a way to address the core complaints of the protesters, which is that their economy is in collapse.
But according to multiple US intelligence reports, while the economic conditions that sparked the protests remain, the upper ranks of the Iranian government appear to be intact with no major fractures. Alex Swatanka, the director of the Iran program at the Washington, D.C.-based Middle East Institute, says without large-scale military defections, Iran's protests remain, quote-unquote, heroic but outgunned. What further complicates matters for Trump is that across the region, from the Gulf to Turkey, governments favor containment over collapse, not out of sympathy for Iran, but out of fear that turmoil inside a nation of 90 million riven by sectarian and ethnic fault lines could unleash instability far beyond Iran's borders. A fractured Iran could spiral into civil war, as happened after the 2003 US invasion of Iraq, unleashing an influx of refugees, fueling Islamist militancy, and disrupting oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz, which is a global energy choke point. Vatanka warns that the gravest risk is fragmentation into early-stage Syria, with rival units and provinces fighting for territory and resources. Gulf states, which have been long-time US allies and hosts American bases, fear that they would be the first targets for Iranian retaliation, which could include Iranian missiles or drone attacks from the Tehran-aligned Houthis in Yemen. India is watching too. Recently dispatched its Deputy National Security Advisor to Tehran. The official called on Ali Larijani, the Secretary of Iran's National Security Council. New Delhi voted against a recent UN Human Rights Council resolution that condemned the crackdown on protesters in Iran. India was among 7 countries which voted against the resolution. Now, all these developments take place at a time when the Trump government is seeking to increase pressure on Tehran over its uranium enrichment and its handling of domestic unrest. That said, the US could still deploy the long-range B-2 stealth bombers from the Indian Ocean base of Diego Garcia. Already, according to some Western media reports, US strategic bombers have left for Diego Garcia. But the absence of any regional support would mean that a US operation would not have the backing of a robust international coalition. US officials say that Trump is reviewing his options but has not decided whether to strike Iran. Asked about prospects for peace, Trump says he has held talks with Iran and that he is planning on having more such talks.
Well, I told him 2 things. Number 1, no nuclear. And number 2, stop killing protesters.
So, will peace be given a chance? Maybe. But a betting platform, Polymarket, which successfully predicted Maduro's capture, says a possibility of Khamenei's ouster are lower than the probability of a US strike on Iran by 28th February. As they say, watch this space. We'll keep you posted.